The air in Brooklyn was thick with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt and the faint, acrid tang of garbage left too long in the alleyways. It was late October, and a damp chill clung to the streets, seeping into the bones of anyone foolish enough to linger outside. The sky hung low, a heavy quilt of gray clouds that seemed to press down on the city, muffling the usual cacophony of car horns and distant sirens. In a forgotten corner of Red Hook, where the waterfront met a maze of crumbling warehouses, a single street lamp flickered, casting a sickly yellow glow over a rusted chain-link fence. Beyond it stood a squat, concrete building, its windows boarded up like eyes shut tight against the world. This was where Tony Russo, a once-feared Mafia boss, now found himself cornered, his empire crumbling like the peeling paint on the warehouse walls. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of cigarette smoke and spilled whiskey. The warehouse was a hollowed-out shell, its cavernous interior lit by a few dangling bulbs that swayed gently in the draft. The concrete floor was stained with years of neglect, and the walls bore scars of graffiti, half scrubbed away, leaving ghostly outlines of tags and curses. A folding table sat in the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs, one of which creaked under Tony's weight as he leaned back, his fingers drumming nervously on the scratched surface. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a face carved by years of hard decisions, deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes, a nose broken one too many times. His once impeccable suit was rumpled now, the tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, revealing a glimpse of graying chest hair. At 52, Tony Russo was a man who had spent decades bending the world to his will, but tonight, the world was bending him. Across the table sat Marco Lorenzo, the youngest son of the Lorenzo crime family, a man whose sharp features and slicked back hair gave him the look of a predator playing at civility. Marco was younger than Tony, barely 30, but his eyes held a cold, calculating glint that made it clear he was no novice. He wore a tailored black suit, a blood-red pocket square peeking out like a warning. Two of his men stood behind him, silent and hulking, their faces shadowed under the dim light. One chewed gum with a slow, deliberate rhythm, his jaw popping like a metronome. The other, a wiry man with a scar running from his ear to his chin, kept his hand near the bulge under his jacket, a reminder that this meeting was anything but friendly. Tony cleared his throat, the sound rough and raw like gravel shifting underfoot. "Marco," he began, his voice low but steady. "You know I'm good for it. Always have been. The docks, the trucking routes, I've kept my end clean for years." Marco leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his fingers steepled. His smile was thin, almost serpentine. "Clean? Tony, you're drowning in dirty money you can't pay back. $3 million plus interest. You think I'm here for stories about the good old days?" His voice was smooth, laced with a Brooklyn accent that sharpened on certain syllables, like a knife catching the light. Tony's jaw tightened, his fingers pausing mid-drum. He glanced at the two men behind Marco, then back at the younger man's unyielding gaze. "I've got assets," he said, forcing the words out. "The warehouse on 4th, the bar in Williamsburg. I can liquidate." "Liquidate?" Marco interrupted, his laugh sharp and mirthless. "You think we want your crumbling empire? Half those properties are leveraged to the hilt. You're out of moves, Tony." He leaned back, crossing his arms, the red pocket square shifting slightly. "But my father's generous. He's willing to wipe the slate clean. One-time offer." Tony's stomach churned, a sickening twist that had nothing to do with the whiskey he'd downed earlier. He knew the Lorenzos didn't offer mercy without a price. "What's the catch?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marco's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Your daughter, Sophia." The name hit Tony like a punch to the gut. His breath caught, and for a moment, the warehouse seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. Sophia, his only child, 24 years old, quiet, awkward, always hiding behind books or her oversized sweaters. She wasn't like him, wasn't built for this world of shadows and blood. He'd tried to keep her out of it, sending her to community college, renting her a small apartment in Park Slope, far from the docks and the deals. But the life had a way of seeping into everything, like the damp that stained the warehouse walls. "You're out of your mind," Tony said, his voice rising despite himself. "She's got nothing to do with this." Marco shrugged, unperturbed. "She's an asset, Tony. You don't have cash, you don't have property worth a damn, but you've got her. My father's got uses for her. She comes with us, your debt's gone, simple. Tony's hands curled into fists, his knuckles whitening. She's my daughter, Marco, not a bargaining chip. Isn't she? Marco tilted his head, his tone almost conversational. You've been using her as a shield your whole life, Tony. Keeping her out of sight, out of trouble while you played kingpin. Now she's the only thing keeping you alive. The words cut deeper than Tony wanted to admit. He thought of Sophia, her round face framed by dark curls, her eyes always carrying a quiet sadness he could never quite reach. She'd been a chubby kid, teased mercilessly at school, and it had only gotten worse as she grew older. She'd never been the daughter he'd imagined parading around at family gatherings, all confidence and charm. Instead, she was shy, self-conscious, her weight a constant source of insecurity she tried to hide behind baggy clothes and a sharp wit. He loved her, in his own broken way, but he'd never been good at showing it. And now, here he was, faced with a choice that made his chest ache like it was caught in a vice. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards over the windows. A faint drizzle had started, pattering against the roof, the sound like 1,000 tiny footsteps. Tony's mind raced, searching for a way out, but every path led back to the same truth. He was out of options. The Lorenzos had him by the throat and they knew it. Give me a week, Tony said finally, his voice hoarse. I'll get the money. Marco shook his head almost pityingly. You've had weeks, Tony. Months. This is the deal. Take it, or we start collecting in other ways. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You know how my father handles debts that don't get paid. Tony's mind flashed to stories he'd heard. Bodies pulled from the East River, warehouses burned to the ground, families torn apart. The Lorenzos didn't just collect money, they collected lives. He thought of Sophia again, sitting in her tiny apartment, probably curled up with one of her history books, oblivious to the storm bearing down on her. He'd failed her in so many ways, absent, distant, always putting the business first. But this was a betrayal he couldn't stomach. Yet the alternative was worse. If he refused, the Lorenzos wouldn't stop at him. They'd go after Sophia anyway, and there'd be no deal, no protection, just violence. At least this way, he told himself, she'd be alive. He'd find a way to get her out. To fix this, he had to believe that. All right, Tony said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. You get Sophia. Debt's clear. Marco's smile returned, wider this time. A predator savoring the kill. Smart man. We'll arrange the details. Tomorrow night you bring her to the pier. No tricks, Tony. You know what happens if you try to play us? Tony nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The warehouse seemed colder now, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were judging him. Marco stood, smoothing his suit, and his men followed, their footsteps echoing on the concrete. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving Tony alone with the hum of the bulbs and the distant patter of rain. On the other side of the warehouse, hidden behind a stack of rotting crates, Sophia Russo stood frozen, her breath shallow, her heart pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear it. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She'd come to the warehouse looking for her father, worried after he hadn't answered her calls for 2 days. She'd slipped in through a side door, the one he always left unlocked for his meetings, hoping to catch him before he disappeared again into whatever shadowy deals kept him away from her. She'd heard everything. Sophia pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Her father's voice, rough and defeated, echoed in her mind. You get Sophia. Debt's clear. The words were a knife, twisting deeper with every replay. She wasn't naive. She knew her father was no saint, knew the whispers about his ties to the underworld, but she'd always believed he'd protect her. That, at least. She was untouchable. Now, that illusion lay shattered, scattered like the broken glass littering the warehouse floor. She was a big girl, always had been, her weight a constant shadow over her life. At school, the taunts had been relentless. Fatso, whale, words that stung no matter how many times she told herself they didn't matter. She'd learned to shrink herself, to wear dark, shapeless clothes to avoid mirrors and the judgment in other people's eyes. But her father? She'd thought he saw past that, saw her. Now she knew the truth. To him, she was just another asset, a pawn to be traded. The warehouse felt suffocating, the air thick with dust and betrayal. Sophia's legs trembled, but she forced herself to move, slipping back toward the side door. The rain was heavier now, soaking her sweater, plastering her curls to her face. She barely noticed. Her mind was a storm of fear and hurt. But beneath it, something else was stirring, a spark of defiance. She wasn't just Tony Russo's daughter, not anymore. She was Sophia, and she wasn't going to let them take her without a fight. As she stepped into the alley, the rain washing away the tears she hadn't realized were falling, Sophia made a silent vow. Whatever the Lorenzos wanted with her, she'd find a way to survive it. She had to. The warehouse stood silent now, save for the rain and the occasional groan of the old building settling. Tony remained at the table, his head in his hands, the weight of his decision pressing down like the clouds outside. He thought of Sophia's face, the way she'd looked at him as a little girl, all trust and wide-eyed wonder. He'd broken that trust tonight, and he knew it, but he'd fix it. He had to believe he could fix it. The city pulsed beyond the warehouse, a living, breathing thing that didn't care about one man's mistakes or one woman's pain. The rain fell harder, blurring the lines between the streetlights and the darkness, as if the world itself was trying to wash away the sins of men like Tony Russo. But some stains, he knew, didn't come clean so easily. The rain had followed Sophia Russo from Brooklyn, chasing her up the New York State Thruway as the black SUV barreled north through the night. The city's jagged skyline had long faded, replaced by the dark, rolling hills of upstate New York, where the trees stood like silent sentinels under a sky bruised with storm clouds. The air inside the vehicle was stifling, thick with the scent of leather and the faint, musky cologne of the man sitting beside her. His name was Frankie, one of Marco Lorenzo's enforcers, a hulking figure with a shaved head and a jaw that looked carved from stone. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the pier in Red Hook, where her father, Tony, had handed her over with a look that was half guilt, half resignation. Sophia's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale against the dark fabric of her oversized hoodie. She stared out the window, watching raindrops streak across the glass, each one blurring the world outside a little more. The pier had been a blur of cold concrete and sodium lights, the air heavy with the briny smell of the East River. Tony had barely met her eyes as he muttered something about fixing this, his voice lost in the wind whipping off the water. Sophia had wanted to scream, to demand why he'd done this, but the words had stuck in her throat, choked by the weight of his betrayal. Instead, she'd stood there, shivering in her sneakers as Frankie and another man, scar-faced, the one from the warehouse, guided her into the SUV. The door had slammed shut with a finality that echoed in her chest, and then they were moving, the city slipping away like a dream she'd never wake from. Now, hours later, the SUV turned onto a winding gravel road, the tires crunching over loose stones. The headlights caught glimpses of dense forest, the branches swaying in the storm, their leaves stripped bare by the late October chill. Sophia's stomach twisted, a mix of fear and nausea. She didn't know where they were taking her, only that it was far from everything she knew. Her cramped Park Slope apartment, her community college classes, the corner deli where she bought her coffee every morning. She felt like a stranger in her own life, a pawn in a game she hadn't chosen to play. The vehicle slowed, and the forest parted to reveal a sprawling mansion, its silhouette looming against the stormy sky. The Lorenzo family's estate was a study in contrasts, opulent yet foreboding, like a castle built on secrets. The building was 3 stories of gray stone, its windows tall and arched, glowing faintly with amber light. Ivy clung to the walls, its tendrils curling like fingers reaching for something to hold on to. A wrought iron gate creaked open and the SUV rolled through, stopping in a circular driveway where a fountain stood silent, its water dark and still under the rain. The air was colder here, sharper, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. Sophia's breath hitched as Frankie opened the door, his massive hand gesturing for her to step out. "Move," he said, his voice low and gravelly, the first word he'd spoken to her all night. Sophia slid out of the SUV, her sneakers sinking slightly into the gravel. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but it still soaked her hoodie, weighing it down against her shoulders. She felt exposed, her body too large, too visible under the mansion's looming presence. She'd always been self-conscious about her weight, the way it made her feel like she took up too much space. Now, that feeling was amplified, as if the mansion itself were judging her, its windows like eyes watching her every move. Frankie led her up a set of wide stone steps to the double doors, carved oak polished to a dark sheen. The scar-faced man trailed behind, his footsteps silent but heavy with intent. The doors opened before they reached them, revealing a foyer that was both grand and oppressive. Marble floors stretched out, reflecting the light of a massive chandelier overhead. its crystals casting jagged shadows on the walls. The air inside was warm but carried a faint mustiness, like a house that held too many secrets. A curved staircase swept upward, its banister gleaming, and portraits lined the walls. Stern-faced men and women in dated clothing, their eyes following Sophia as she stepped inside. A woman appeared at the edge of the foyer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. She was in her late 30s, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Her navy blazer and pencil skirt gave her the look of a corporate lawyer, but her eyes were too knowing, too calculating. "Sophia Russo," she said. Her voice clipped, with a faint trace of a New York accent softened by something else, maybe years spent elsewhere. "I'm Elena. You'll be staying here for now." Sophia's throat tightened. "Where's here?" she asked, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. Elena's lips curved, not quite a smile. "The Lorenzo estate. You're a guest for now. Follow me." The word guest felt like a lie, but Sophia didn't argue. She followed Elena, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the marble, Frankie and the scar-faced man trailing behind. The mansion's interior was a maze of hallways, each one lined with dark wood paneling and heavy drapes that blocked out the night. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and something sharper, like cleaning solution trying to mask something older, deeper. Sophia's heart pounded, her mind racing with questions she didn't dare ask. What did they want with her? Why her? The memory of her father's voice. "You get Sophia." Debts clear, burned in her mind, each word a fresh wound. Elena led her to a room on the second floor, a guest suite that was both luxurious and cold. The bed was a four-poster, draped in heavy burgundy curtains, and a fireplace sat unlit against one wall, its mantel adorned with ornate candlesticks. A single window overlooked the dark forest, the glass streaked with rain. The room was beautiful, but it felt like a cage, the walls closing in despite their grandeur. Elena gestured to a chair by a small writing desk. "Sit," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. Sophia sat, her hands twisting in her lap. The chair creaked under her weight and she winced, hating how it amplified her self-consciousness. "What's going to happen to me?" she asked, forcing the words out. Elena didn't answer right away. She crossed the room, her heels clicking, and poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher on the dresser. "Drink," she said, handing it to Sophia. "You look like you need it." Sophia took the glass, her hands trembling. The water was cold, almost too cold, and it did little to ease the knot in her stomach. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Just tell me why I'm here." Elena's expression softened, just for a moment before hardening again. "You're here because your father made a deal. Beyond that, it's not my place to say, but you'll be safe for now. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a long day." The vagueness of her words only deepened Sophia's fear. She wanted to push, to demand answers, but Elena's tone left no room for argument. The older woman turned to leave, pausing at the door. "There's a bathroom through there," she said, nodding to a door in the corner. "Clothes in the dresser. They should fit." Sophia glanced at the dresser, her cheeks burning. The idea of someone picking out clothes for her, knowing her size, felt like another violation. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Elena left, the door clicking shut behind her, and Sophia was alone. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the window. Sophia set the glass down and stood, her legs shaky. She crossed to the window, peering out at the dark expanse of forest. The trees swayed in the wind, their branches clawing at the sky. She felt like one of those trees, battered and alone, rooted in a place she didn't belong. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and distorted in the glass, her dark curls plastered to her face from the rain. She looked away, unable to bear the sight of herself. The dresser held a few simple outfits, sweatpants, t-shirts, a cardigan, all in dark colors, all in her size. The thoughtfulness of it unnerved her, as if someone had been planning this for longer than she wanted to imagine. She changed out of her wet hoodie, the dry clothes a small comfort against the chill of the room. The bed was soft, the sheets crisp, but sleep felt impossible. She lay there staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the moment at the pier, her father's averted eyes, the way his hands had trembled as he handed her over. Hours later, a soft knock at the door startled her. She sat up, heart racing as Elena slipped back into the room. The woman was different now, her blazer gone, replaced by a simple black sweater. Her hair was still neat, but there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She carried a tray with a sandwich and a glass of milk, setting it on the desk. "You didn't eat," Elena said, her voice quieter now, almost gentle. "You need to keep your strength up." Sophia's throat tightened. "Why do you care?" she asked, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "You're one of them, aren't you?" Elena hesitated, her gaze flickering to the window. "I work for the Lorenzos," she said carefully, "but that doesn't mean I agree with everything they do." The admission hung in the air, fragile and unexpected. Sophia studied her, searching for a lie, but Elena's expression was unreadable. "Then help me," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not that simple," she said, "but I'll make sure you're treated decently for now. Eat, rest, don't do anything rash." She turned to leave, but Sophia's voice stopped her. "What do they want with me? Just tell me that." Elena paused, her hand on the doorknob. "I can't," she said finally, "but I'll try to keep an eye on you. That's all I can promise." The door closed again, and Sophia was alone with the tray and her thoughts. The sandwich was simple, turkey and cheese, nothing fancy, but it was more than she'd expected. She ate slowly, the food tasteless in her mouth, her mind churning. Elena's kindness, however small, was a lifeline in the dark, but it also raised questions. Why was she helping? What did she know? Sophia didn't trust her. Not yet, but the spark of defiance she'd felt in the warehouse was growing, fueled by the smallest hint of hope. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only the wind to howl through the trees. The mansion was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt alive, like the house itself was holding its breath. Sophia lay back down, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her mind racing. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing. She wasn't just a pawn. Not anymore. Whatever the Lorenzos had planned, she'd find a way to fight it, even if it meant trusting someone like Elena. The night stretched on, the mansion's shadows deepening, and Sophia Russo, for the first time in her life, felt the weight of her own strength, fragile but growing, like a seed pushing through the cracks in the stone. The Lorenzo estate was a labyrinth of secrets, its grand halls and shadowed corners whispering of things best left hidden. By the third day of Sophia Russo's captivity, the mansion's opulence had lost its sheen, replaced by a creeping dread that clung to her like the damp chill of the upstate New York autumn. The rain had returned, heavier now, drumming against the tall windows of her guest suite with a relentless rhythm that mirrored the pounding of her heart. The room, with its burgundy-draped four-poster bed and unlit fireplace, felt more like a prison than ever, the walls pressing in despite their elegance. Outside, the forest surrounding the estate loomed dark and impenetrable, the trees stripped bare by the season, their skeletal branches clawing at a sky the color of slate. The air carried the sharp scent of wet pine and earth, a reminder of how far Sophia was from the familiar grit of Brooklyn. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting the hem of her oversized cardigan, the one Elena had left in the dresser. The clothes fit her well enough, but they felt like a costume, as if she were playing a role in someone else's story. Her reflection in the window caught her eye, pale, round-faced, her dark curls tangled from restless sleep. She looked away, hating the vulnerability she saw there, the way her size seemed to amplify her powerlessness in this place. At 24, Sophia had spent years building walls around herself, using sarcasm and solitude to shield her from the world's judgment. But here, in the Lorenzo's domain, those walls felt as fragile as the mansion's rain-streaked glass. Elena had been her only anchor, a flicker of humanity in this cold, calculated world. The older woman's small acts of kindness, the sandwich, the glass of milk, the quiet promise to keep an eye on her, had planted a seed of trust, though Sophia was still wary. Elena's role in the Lorenzo family was unclear, her demeanor a mix of professionalism and guarded compassion. She was always impeccably dressed, her navy blazer and tight bun a stark contrast to the casual cruelty of men like Frankie, the hulking enforcer, or the scar-faced man whose name Sophia still didn't know. But Elena's eyes held a weariness that suggested she'd seen too much, carried too many burdens. Sophia clung to that, hoping it meant Elena could be an ally, not just another cog in the Lorenzo machine. The day began like the others, with Elena knocking softly before entering the room, this time with a tray of coffee and toast. The coffee was strong, its bitter aroma cutting through the musty air of the suite. "You're up early," Elena said, setting the tray on the writing desk. Her voice was calm, but there was a tightness to it, a hint of something unsaid. "Couldn't sleep," Sophia replied, her voice hoarse. She stood, smoothing her cardigan, and crossed to the desk. The toast was plain, no butter, but she nibbled at it anyway, more out of habit than hunger. "What's the plan today? More sitting around waiting for someone to tell me why I'm here?" Elena's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flickering to the door. "You'll have a visitor later. Marco wants to check on you." Sophia's stomach dropped. Marco Lorenzo, the sharp-featured man who'd orchestrated her handover, was a specter in her mind, his cold smile a reminder of the deal that had brought her here. "Check on me?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. "What does that mean?" Elena hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the tray. "Just be careful what you say. Marco's not patient." The warning hung in the air, heavy as the storm clouds outside. Sophia nodded, her throat tight. Elena left without another word, the door clicking shut, leaving Sophia alone with the tray and her racing thoughts. The coffee was too hot, burning her tongue, but she drank it anyway, needing something to ground her. The idea of facing Marco filled her with dread, but it also sparked the defiance that had been growing since the night at the warehouse. She wasn't going to just sit here, a passive piece in their game. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The mansion was quiet during the day, its inhabitants moving like ghosts through the halls. Sophia had noticed the pattern: servants cleaning in the early hours, Frankie and other enforcers patrolling at odd intervals, Marco and his inner circle absent until evening. It gave her a window, however small, to explore. She'd been warned to stay in her room, but the lock on the door was flimsy, more symbolic than secure. Elena hadn't explicitly forbidden her from wandering, and Sophia took that as permission, or at least an opportunity. She slipped into the hallway, her sneakers silent on the polished wood floor. The corridor was long, lined with heavy drapes and more of those stern portraits, their eyes seeming to follow her. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint scent of old wood and wax polish. She moved carefully, her heart pounding, every creak of the floorboards making her freeze. The mansion was a maze, but she'd memorized the path from her room to the foyer, counting the turns. Left, right, then left again. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that she needed something, anything, to make sense of why she was here. The hallway led to a staircase, not the grand one in the foyer, but a narrower utilitarian one tucked behind a tapestry. It descended into darkness, the air growing colder with each step. Sophia hesitated, her hand on the banister, the wood smooth and cold under her fingers. The rational part of her screamed to turn back, but the spark of defiance pushed her forward. She needed to know what the Lorenzos were hiding, what they wanted with her. The stairs creaked under her weight, and she winced, her self-consciousness flaring. She hated how her body felt like a liability, how every movement seemed to announce her presence. At the bottom of the stairs was a heavy metal door, slightly ajar, a sliver of fluorescent light spilling through the crack. Sophia's breath caught, her pulse racing. She pressed herself against the wall, listening. The faint hum of machinery came from beyond the door, along with the low murmur of voices. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clinical, detached, like doctors discussing a procedure. Patient, viable, extraction. The words sent a chill down her spine, sharp and visceral. She inched closer, her sneakers scuffing softly against the concrete floor. Peering through the crack, she saw a room that looked like something out of a hospital, not a mansion. The walls were stark white, the floor tiled, the air heavy with the sharp tang of antiseptic. Stainless steel tables lined one wall, covered with medical equipment, syringes, monitors, a tray of gleaming scalpels. A computer hummed in the corner, its screen casting a blue glow over a man in a white coat. His back to her, another man, one of Marco's enforcers, stood nearby, his arms crossed, a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. Sophia's heart thudded so loudly she was sure they'd hear it. The man in the white coat turned slightly, revealing a clipboard with charts and numbers. "She's a good match," he said, his voice clipped. "Professional. Her size makes her ideal. We can maximize output without complications." Sophia's blood ran cold. Her size, the words echoed in her mind, slicing through the fog of fear. They were talking about her body, her weight. The thing she'd spent her life trying to hide was why she was here. The realization hit like a physical blow, her knees buckling slightly. She gripped the doorframe, her nails digging into the metal, fighting the urge to run. The man in the white coat continued, oblivious to her presence. We'll need to prep her soon. The buyers are impatient. Buyers. The word was a knife, cutting deeper with every second. Sophia's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The Lorenzos weren't just holding her as leverage. They had a plan, something clinical, calculated, and horrific. She thought of the medical equipment, the sterile room, the word extraction. Her stomach churned, bile rising in her throat. They were going to use her body, not for labor, not for ransom, but for something far worse. Organ trafficking. The phrase crystallized in her mind, a dark truth she couldn't unsee. Her size, her weight, the thing she'd hated most about herself, was their prize. She stumbled back, her sneaker catching on the concrete, a soft scrape that echoed in the silence. The enforcer's head snapped toward the door, his eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" he barked, his hand moving to the walkie-talkie. Panic surged through Sophia, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She turned and ran, her footsteps heavy, her body feeling like it was betraying her with every step. The stairs seemed endless, her legs burning, her lungs aching. She reached the hallway, her heart pounding, and ducked behind the tapestry, pressing herself against the wall. The enforcer's footsteps echoed below, slow and deliberate, but they didn't follow. Not yet. Sophia's mind was a storm of fear and rage. She wanted to scream, to break something, to confront the people who saw her as nothing more than a commodity. But she couldn't. Not yet. She needed to be smart, to survive. She needed Elena. Back in her room, Sophia collapsed onto the bed, her chest heaving. The rain was louder now, a roar against the windows, mirroring the chaos in her mind. She replayed the conversation she'd overheard, each word a weight pressing down on her. Her size makes her ideal. The cruelty of it was staggering, not just the Lorenzo's plan, but the way it weaponized her deepest insecurity. She'd spent years dodging mirrors, avoiding scales, trying to shrink herself in a world that judged her for taking up space. Now, that space was all they saw. Hours later, Elena returned, her knock softer this time, almost hesitant. She carried no tray, just a small notebook tucked under her arm. Her eyes scanned Sophia's face, narrowing slightly. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, closing the door behind her. Sophia's voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "I know what they're planning. I heard them. Downstairs in some lab. They're going to—" She stopped, her throat closing. "They're going to take my organs because of my size." Elena's face went still, her lips parting slightly. For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes searching Sophia's. Then she crossed the room, sitting on the edge of the desk, her posture rigid. "You shouldn't have gone down there," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "You knew?" Sophia's voice cracked, anger flaring. "You knew, and you didn't tell me." Elena's jaw tightened. "I suspected. I don't have access to everything, Sophia. I'm not one of them, not really. I handle their books, their schedules, but I hear things. I see things." "Then help me," Sophia pleaded, standing now, her hands clenched into fists. "You said you'd keep an eye on me. This is what you meant? Letting them carve me up?" Elena's eyes flashed, a mix of guilt and resolve. "It's not that simple. The Lorenzos don't just let people walk away, but I'm not going to let them do this to you. Not if I can help it." The words were a lifeline, fragile, but real. Sophia studied her, searching for deceit, but Elena's expression was raw, unguarded. "Why?" Sophia asked. "Why risk it for me?" Elena hesitated, her fingers tightening around the notebook. "Because I've seen what they do, to people like you, like me, people they think don't matter. I'm tired of looking the other way." Sophia's chest ached, a mix of fear and hope. She didn't fully trust Elena, not yet, but she had no one else. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steadier now. Elena leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need proof, something concrete to take them down. There's a computer in that lab. Records, transactions, names of buyers. If we can get those, we can go to the feds. But it's risky. If they catch us..." She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Sophia nodded, the spark of defiance now aflame. "I'm in," she said. "I'm not letting them win." Elena's lips curved, a ghost of a smile. "Good, but we move carefully. Tomorrow, when Marco's distracted, we'll try. For now, stay put. Act normal. They're watching." The door clicked shut as Elena left, and Sophia sank back onto the bed, her mind racing. The rain roared outside, the wind howling through the forest. But inside, Sophia felt a shift. She was still afraid, still humiliated, but she wasn't powerless. Not anymore. With Elena's help, she'd fight back and she'd make the Lorenzos pay for seeing her as nothing more than a body to be used. The Lorenzo estate was a fortress of shadows, its stone walls and towering windows standing resolute against the storm that had raged for days. By the 5th night of Sophia Russo's captivity, the rain had become a constant, its roar blending with the howling wind that tore through the upstate New York forest. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and pine, the kind of damp chill that seeped into your bones and stayed there. Inside the mansion, the opulence of chandeliers and marble floors felt like a cruel facade, masking the horrors Sophia had uncovered in the basement lab. The sterile room, with its gleaming scalpels and cold computer screens, haunted her thoughts, a reminder of the Lorenzo family's plan to exploit her body for profit. But tonight, that plan would unravel. Tonight, Sophia and Elena would fight back. Sophia stood in her guest suite, her hands trembling as she zipped up the dark cardigan Elena had provided days ago. The room, with its heavy burgundy drapes and unlit fireplace, felt smaller now, the walls closing in as the clock ticked closer to their plan's execution. The mirror on the dresser reflected her pale face, her dark curls tangled from restless nights, her eyes burning with a mix of fear and resolve. She'd spent her life shrinking from the world, hiding her insecurities behind baggy clothes and sharp wit. But the discovery of the Lorenzo's organ trafficking scheme had ignited something fierce within her. She wasn't just Tony Russo's daughter, a pawn in a mafia deal. She was Sophia, and she was done being a victim. Elena had slipped into the room minutes earlier, her usual navy blazer replaced by a black sweater, her tight bun loosened slightly, strands of dark hair framing her face. She carried a small USB drive, her fingers clutching it like a lifeline. "This is it," she'd whispered, her voice low but steady. "The files are on the lab computer, buyer names, transaction records, everything. If we get this to the feds, the Lorenzos are done." Sophia had nodded, her throat tight. The plan was simple but perilous. Sneak back to the basement lab, download the files, and get out before Marco or his enforcers noticed. Elena had a contact, a former colleague with ties to the FBI, who could ensure the evidence reached the right hands. But the risks were staggering. Frankie, the hulking enforcer, and the scar-faced man patrolled the mansion like wolves, and Marco's check-in was scheduled for tonight, his presence a ticking clock. Sophia's heart pounded, her palms sweaty, but the spark of defiance that had grown since the warehouse was now afire. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every person the Lorenzos had used, every life they'd treated as disposable. The mansion was quieter tonight, the storm muffling the usual creaks and footsteps. Sophia followed Elena down the narrow back staircase, the same one she'd taken to the lab the day before. The air grew colder with each step, the scent of antiseptic seeping through the walls, a grim reminder of what lay below. Sophia's sneakers were silent on the concrete, but her breathing felt loud, each exhale a betrayal of her presence. Elena moved with a practiced ease, her steps deliberate, her eyes scanning the shadows. She'd explained earlier that her role as the Lorenzo family's bookkeeper gave her access to parts of the mansion others didn't, but it also made her a target if they were caught. "They don't trust anyone," she'd said. "Not even me." The metal door to the lab was still there, its sliver of fluorescent light spilling into the stairwell. Elena paused, pressing a finger to her lips, and listened. The hum of machinery was faint, the voices from yesterday gone. She pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking softly, and slipped inside, Sophia close behind. The lab was as stark as Sophia remembered. White walls, tiled floor, steel tables lined with medical equipment. The computer in the corner hummed, its screen dark but alive, a faint blue glow pulsing from the power button. Sophia's stomach churned at the sight of the scalpels, their blades glinting under the fluorescent lights. She forced herself to focus, her eyes darting to the door, expecting Frankie or the scar-faced man to burst in at any moment. Elena moved to the computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "It's password protected," she muttered, her voice tense. "I've seen Marco use it before. Give me a second." Sophia stood guard, her back to the wall, her heart hammering. The room felt claustrophobic, the antiseptic smell overwhelming. Every sound, the hum of the computer, the drip of a faucet, the distant howl of the wind made her flinch. She thought of her father, Tony, his broken promise at the pier, his trembling hands as he handed her over. The betrayal still stung, a wound that hadn't healed, but she pushed it down. There'd be time for that later, if she survived. "Got it," Elena whispered, plugging in the USB drive. The screen lit up, files scrolling past. Names, dates, dollar amounts, medical terms Sophia didn't fully understand but knew were damning. "It's copying. 2 minutes." 2 minutes felt like an eternity. Sophia's eyes flicked to the door, her body tense. She thought of her life before this, her small apartment, her history books, the quiet mornings at the deli. It seemed like another world, one she might never get back to. But she wasn't the same person anymore. The girl who'd hidden from the world was gone, replaced by someone who refused to be a victim. A sudden noise, a sharp thud from the hallway, made Sophia freeze. Elena's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Keep watch," she hissed, her fingers still on the keyboard. Sophia crept to the door, peering through the crack. The hallway was dark, but she heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Frankie. She recognized the rhythm, the way his boots hit the concrete like a drum beat. Her breath caught, her hands shaking. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Elena cursed under her breath, the USB drive still blinking as the files copied. "Almost done. Stall them if you have to." Sophia's mind raced. Stall them? How? She was no match for Frankie. His bulk and strength a wall she couldn't hope to breach. But she had to try. She slipped back into the stairwell, her heart pounding, and called out, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "Hello? Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped, then quickened. Frankie's silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs, his shaved head gleaming under the faint light. "What the hell are you doing down here?" he growled, his voice like gravel. Sophia's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to speak. I got lost. I was looking for the kitchen." It was a weak lie, but it was all she had. Frankie's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on the bulge under his jacket. "You don't belong down here. Back to your room. Now." Before Sophia could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "She's with me." Elena stepped out of the lab, the USB drive tucked into her pocket, her expression calm but firm. "I was showing her the layout. Marco's orders." Frankie's gaze shifted between them, suspicion etched into his face. "Marco didn't say nothing about that." "Then call him," Elena said, her voice steady. "But you know how he gets when you interrupt his meetings." The mention of Marco seemed to give Frankie pause. He grunted, stepping back. "Fine, but you both stay where I can see you." Elena nodded, guiding Sophia up the stairs, her hand firm on her arm. Sophia's legs felt like jelly, but she kept moving, her mind racing with the weight of what they'd just done. The USB drive in Elena's pocket was their ticket out, but it was also a death sentence if they were caught. As they reached the hallway, the tapestry swaying behind them, Sophia felt a surge of adrenaline. They'd done it. They had the evidence. Now they just had to get it out. The plan moved quickly after that. Elena's contact, a man named Agent Daniels, worked out of an FBI field office in Albany. She'd reached him through a burner phone hidden in her room, a relic from her days before the Lorenzos. The call was brief, the instructions clear. Meet at a gas station 10 miles from the estate, hand over the USB drive, and disappear. Elena had a car stashed in the woods, a beat-up sedan she'd kept for emergencies. The challenge was getting out of the mansion without raising suspicion, especially with Marco's visit looming. Sophia's meeting with Marco came sooner than expected. He arrived in the late afternoon, his tailored suit and blood-red pocket square as pristine as ever. The library where he met her was a cavernous room, its walls lined with leather-bound books and heavy oak shelves. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across Marco's sharp features. He sat in a high-backed chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes cold, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You're settling in," he said, his voice smooth, his Brooklyn accent sharp on the edges. "Good. We have big plans for you." Sophia's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "What kind of plans?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Marco's smile was thin, almost amused. "You don't need to worry about that. Just do as you're told and everything will be fine." The vagueness of his words was a knife, twisting the fear she'd been carrying since the lab. She thought of the USB drive, hidden in Elena's room, and clung to the hope it represented. "And if I don't?" she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Marco's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "Don't test me, Sophia. Your father made a deal. You're part of it. Play nice, or things get messy." The threat hung in the air, heavy as the storm outside. Sophia nodded, her throat tight, and Marco dismissed her with a wave, turning his attention to a phone call. She left the library, her heart pounding, the fire's warmth doing nothing to ease the chill in her bones. That night the escape began. Elena led Sophia through a servant's passage, a narrow corridor hidden behind a false panel in the kitchen. The air was musty, the walls rough with exposed stone, the only light coming from Elena's phone. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the storm's roar. The sedan was where Elena had promised, hidden under a tarp in the forest, its paint chipped, but the engine still functional. Sophia slid into the passenger seat, her breath shallow as Elena started the car. The headlights cut through the rain, the wipers slapping rhythmically against the windshield. The gas station was a lonely outpost, its neon sign flickering in the dark. Agent Daniels was waiting, a middle-aged man in a nondescript jacket, his face lined with years of stress. He took the USB drive with a nod, his voice low. "Get out of here. We'll handle the rest." Sophia and Elena drove back to the mansion, knowing they couldn't disappear yet, not without raising suspicion. The raid came hours later, in the dead of night. Sirens pierced the storm, red and blue lights flashing through the rain-soaked windows. FBI agents swarmed the estate, their shouts echoing through the halls. Sophia and Elena hid in the servants' passage, their backs pressed against the stone, listening as Marco's men scrambled, their voices panicked. But the raid wasn't the end. As the agents cleared the mansion, Sophia heard a voice that stopped her heart, her father's. Tony Russo had come, tipped off by a contact, his face haggard as he pushed through the chaos. Sophia stepped out of the passage, her eyes locking with his. The air between them was thick with years of unspoken pain. "Sophia," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what they were planning." "You gave me to them," Sophia said, her voice raw, tears streaming down her face. "You traded me like I was nothing." Tony's shoulders slumped, his eyes wet. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I could fix it. I was wrong. I'm so sorry." The words didn't erase the betrayal, but they cracked something open in Sophia, a flicker of the love she'd once felt for him. She didn't forgive him, not yet, but she saw the man beneath the Mafia boss, broken and desperate. "Help us now," she said. "Make it right." Tony nodded, turning to the agents, offering everything he knew about the Lorenzos. It wasn't redemption, not fully, but it was a start. The mansion was a crime scene now, its opulence stripped away by the flashing lights and yellow tape. Marco and his men were led out in handcuffs, their faces grim. Sophia stood outside, the rain soaking her hair, Elena at her side. The forest was silent now, the storm easing, the first hints of dawn breaking through the clouds. Sophia felt the weight of her journey, the fear, the humiliation, the defiance that had carried her through. She wasn't the same woman who'd been handed over at the pier. She was stronger, forged in the fire of her own survival. Elena touched her arm, a rare gesture of warmth. "You did good," she said. "You're free now." Sophia nodded, her eyes on the horizon. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time it was hers to choose. The rain fell softly now, washing away the stains of the night, and Sophia Russo took her first step into a new life, one where she defined her own worth.